I'm attorney Sadiyah Evangelista, and this is my daughter Talia, and we're bringing you information. As an advocate for freedom, justice, and equality, my heart is angry and mourns for the people of Flint, Michigan, because they may never experience what it means to be made whole in their minds, their bodies, and their spirits. This monstrosity of a water crisis could have been avoided and will affect the communities for generations to come, not only in Flint, Michigan, but other communities just like Flint. When we look at the demographic makeup of the residents of Flint, we see that 65% of the city population is black and brown, where the non-white total population of the state of Michigan is only 22%. Now, Flint's median income for the 100,000 residents is 42% below the poverty level. State of Michigan, 17% below the poverty level. Now, in an era with a black president, you would expect to see an increase in the quality of education, mental and physical health, legal protection, and other rights for blacks, Latinos, Native Americans, and other oppressed groups all over America. But then you look at the horrors that the citizens of Flint endure every day, and you realize Flint, Michigan represents a selfie of many black and brown cities in America. It wasn't until December 14, 2015, when newly elected black mayor Karen Weaver declared a state of emergency in the lead water crisis in Flint, 20 months after the city began drawing its water from the Flint River in an effort to save money with a new pipeline that was supposed to be built. Now, during this time, the alarm was sounded by the residents of this poor community. Now, the residents immediately started complaining about the quality of the water after the switch in the water supply in April, but they were advised to boil their water due to a known coli form of bacteria detection in August and September, and they attributed the taste and the color to cold weather, aging pipes, and a population decline. Not because they forgot to put a particular chemical in the water that would stop the corrosion and stop the leaching of the lead into the water. There was an alarm that was set off through the General Motors plant, which complained about the corrosive water destroying its car parts, and they switched their water supply. However, the residents had to continue to boil, drink, bathe, cook for their families, and make bottles for their babies with this contaminated water. Now, it took the governor about a month to declare a state of emergency, and that was after a federal investigation occurred. So he didn't do this on his own accord. He would have let this continue. But it was because of the courageous effort of the mayor who brought attention to this travesty. Now, he set aside $28 million in state aid to help the residents. Now, it wasn't until January 16th of this year that President Obama declared a federal state emergency and sent inadequate aid to help the lead-ravaged community. Initially, it was $5 million, hoping to pay for water filters to purify the water supply through the faucet, not through the actual source of the water, and then to buy bottled water for people to drink, bathe, and cook out of. That's just totally unacceptable and inadequate for a town of 100,000. Now, President Obama finally conceded to the pleas of the resident, and he helped approve about $80 million more. Now, I saw an article yesterday that said Governor Snyder will propose an additional $195 million in state spending, including $25 million to replace the lead-contaminated pipes. But when you look at all the money that's calculated together with the $85 million from federal aid and the $223 million in state aid, it averages out to about $3,000 per person in Flint for the 999,700 residents, or about $12,000 for a family of 4. Now, can the residents be actually made whole? I mean, they're going to be dealing with lead contamination or toxicity for the rest of their life. Their children are going to have cognitive developmental issues for the rest of their life. Their economic wealth is going to be affected because they're not going to be they're going to be disabled, mentally. The crime element is going to increase because of this. I mean, there's so many collateral damages that are going to occur because of this travesty. Now, we ask the question, what about these poor residents suing the government for the loss of life, health, and property? Well, in a crisis like this, you would expect lawsuits to pile in. But there's one issue that every one of the plaintiffs must hurdle over with Superman leaps and bounds. It's called, are y'all ready? Sovereign immunity. In the United States, there is a legal privilege by which American, federal, state, and tribal governments cannot be sued unless they waive its immunity and consent to sue. So the state government has to say, you know what? I consent to be sued. The federal government has to consent to say, I consent to sue. You can sue me and I'll pay you. In Supreme Court case, Price versus United States Supreme Court acknowledged it's an axiom of our jurisprudence. The government is not liable to suit unless it consents thereto, and its liability in suit cannot be extended beyond the plain language of the statute authorizing it. Now, although the Supreme Court have prohibited private parties from suing states under the 11th Amendment, states became almost completely shielded from federal law. There are some exceptions to these rules. However, the exceptions are very limited. Now, the Supreme Court, in adopting a legal fiction, because that's what it really is, attempted to balance the rights of the states with those of the federal government, known as the stripping doctrine. So what is the stripping doctrine said? This is the exception to the 11th Amendment that strips states officials of the state's immunity when he or she acts unconstitutionally. So we can say that the state government in the state of Michigan acted unconstitutionally. It was criminal. What happened was criminal. What happened to these people, what continues to happen to these people, is criminal. Governor Snyder does not want to step down. He believes that he can throw money at the problem and then it's okay, that if he had good PR, no, he needs to step down. Now, a private citizen can sue a state official for injunctive relief, which is a court-ordered act or prohibition against an act or condition despite the state's 11th Amendment sovereignty immunity. So, in essence, it says that a state official acts illegally and violates the constitutional rights of the individual. He or she is beyond the scope of his power and therefore has not been authorized by the state. Therefore, the official is stripped of his position of power or any powers that he may have in his position. This gives the suing party a right to sue as an individual. So, okay, hypothetically speaking, will the residents be able to sue the governor for the state of Michigan? Well, but again, the government itself is still immune from being sued through another doctrine called respondeat superior, which states that the state is responsible for the actions of employees perform within the course of their employment. These doctrines cancel each other out, and hence it is the reason why the stripping doctrine is hence a legal fiction. So they give you a right to sue the state individually, but then they say that you can't make us responsible for something that the employee did, outside of the scope of their duties. Well, we can argue, that was in the scope of their duties, and it was either gross negligence, and what they did was actually unconstitutional. But will we see some justice in that? Probably not, because history dictates itself. Now, the municipal governments do not enjoy the same protection as state and federal governments under the sovereign immunity. The citizens of Flint can possibly sue the city of Flint. However, the city is on the verge of bankruptcy, and with the ongoing diminishing economy and the flight of the residents, the harm, citizens of Flint may have to get in line with other bill collectors, like its neighboring city, Detroit. Now, the ideal situation is suing the state of Michigan in order to receive any real compensation in the process of coming home. So, we have to ask the question, how do we make these citizens whole? How do we make these citizens whole? Do we throw money at them? Because if we did give them money in order to help them with their health, because they're going to be dealing with long-term health issues, mental health issues, will the community be able to sustain itself? And do we look to the federal government, and do we look to the state government or the municipal government to help ourselves? These are just questions that are out there, because it seems like the system is systematically set up to hurt, experiment, and to do all kind of harmful acts to people of color, black and brown. So, Sadiyah, what do you say?
Black Lives Matter.
And what else?
Justice or else.
It's justice or else. Separation is the key.